Are you turning the radar on? When you're having a shower, what are you thinking about? When you're having breakfast, what are you thinking about? As you start your day, what are you thinking about? If you're driving to work or going to work, what are you thinking about? Every time you see a red car on the road, what are you thinking about? And you're going to hate me for that one. What are you thinking about during morning tea? What are you thinking about at lunchtime? What are you thinking about when you're driving the kids to school? What are you thinking about if you're going to college, if you're going to university? What are you thinking about? What are you thinking about every time the phone rings? What are you thinking about every time you see a flower or a dog or a cat? Use triggers from your environment to pull up your awareness. What am I thinking about? You've got to become very familiar with your own mind. And some people say, I don't want to know what I'm thinking about. People get scared. Oh, I don't want to look at my thoughts. They're just words in your head. And thinking to yourself, I don't want to know, it's too scary, is only a thought. If you're not prepared to look at your thinking, how are you going to recover? And it's not skillful, it's not compassionate. And so you can feel the fear and have a look at your thoughts and see the thought, I'm too scared to look at this. And see how your body responds to it. So the first stage is becoming aware, becoming mindful, pulling back and just listening to your thoughts. I say to people, when I was on the phones and they'd be having a panic attack, I'd say, what are you thinking about? Nothing, I'm not thinking of anything. What were you thinking 5 minutes before the panic attack? Nothing, I wasn't thinking of anything. That's not true. They were thinking of something before the panic attack and they're certainly thinking something now during the panic attack. They simply were not aware. So you become very, very skilled in becoming mindful, being aware of your thinking. But I know that you won't. Not initially. It takes some time to get into it. So when you're feeling anxious, bring up your awareness. What are you thinking about? What are you thinking about? What were you thinking 5 minutes before you noticed your anxiety level rising? If you're having a panic attack, what were you thinking 5 minutes before? Or were you dissociating? Because a lot of us will dissociate, go into a trance state and then panic as a result of the trance state. So become aware. Did you trance out and then think, oh, what's happening to me? Here it comes again? Or were you just simply thinking and those thoughts induced a panic attack or induced your anxiety? And it's not you having a panic attack first or being anxious first and then your thinking starts. It's your thinking that's creating it, unless you're dissociating or trancing out, and then it's your thoughts about the trance state that are creating it. You need to become aware and see and understand that whole process. When you're having a panic attack, and initially it's too difficult to become aware of what you're thinking about, but after a panic attack, stop, think, go back. What were you thinking about 5 minutes before the attack? Were you dissociating? What were you thinking about 10 minutes before? Were you dissociating? What were you thinking about 15, 20 minutes before? And you can backtrack on your thoughts and you can see your thoughts building and building, or you can see yourself how you were dissociating and your attack's just a natural result of the whole thing. The same if you're feeling anxious. What are you thinking about? You need to become aware of what's happening in your own mind, but then you need to bring that awareness down into the body and see how it's being created. You need to see how the thoughts are turning on the fight and flight response and how all your symptoms are being activated. And you need to see the whole thing as it happens. Either being aware, I'm dissociating, I tranced out, and then I thought, oh, here I go, I'm going crazy, or whatever it is you're thinking. Or you're thinking about, gosh, I hope I'm not anxious, I hope I don't get anxious, I hope I don't have a panic attack. And you need to be aware of how that is turning on the fight and flight response. You need to become aware. And as I said to you before, it's not necessarily the obvious panic, anxiety thoughts that are doing it now. It could be anything that you're thinking about will be triggering it. especially if it's in relation to the self issues that we were talking about before. What will people think of me? I'm feeling guilty, or whatever it is. Become aware and see how those thoughts are also turning on the fight and flight response. So that is the first part, is to be mindful, to be aware. Become aware of your thinking, bring that awareness down into your body and see how your body is responding. Or if you dissociate, become aware if you're dissociating, see the thought, see how that turns on the fight and flight response and how your body responds. Does everyone understand that first part? So that's the first part. The second part, what do we do with it? In meditation, you know, I was saying to you, become aware of your thinking, let go of your thoughts and bring your mind back to the word or back to the breath or back to the image. Now, we're not going to be walking around meditating because that's really silly and it's avoidance behaviour and it's distracting. But we're going to bring the letting go process over into everyday life. Because when you're aware of your thinking and you can actually see how your anxiety and panic is being created, A, you begin to lose your fear of it because you can just see what's happening so clearly. But you also see you have a choice. You keep thinking those thoughts and you know what's going to happen. Panic, anxiety city. You have a choice. You can either keep thinking that way or you can simply stop. And so what we get you to do is see the thought and label it. We deliberately get you to label the thought. That way you're not distracting from the thought, you're not running from the thought, you're taking it head on. So you label the thought. Yes, that's an anxiety thought, that's a panic thought, that's a guilt thought, that's a must thought, that's a should thought, that's a depressive thought, that's a guilt, whatever. Label the thought and let it go the same way as you did in meditation. Stop thinking about it. And the moment you let it go, oh, it's straight back up. Yoo-hoo, here I am. Label the thought, let it go. And it's going to come straight back at you. Label it, let it go. And it's going to come straight back at you again. Label it, let it go. And it will come back and it will be more urgent. Why aren't you taking notice of me? This could be the big one that's coming. Your heart's really racing now. And you think, oh, that's an anxiety thought, and you let it go. And it'll come straight back up like a cobra and hiss at you. Your heart's really racing. You're having trouble breathing. Are you sure that big one's not going to come? You go, anxiety thought, and you label it, let it go. And it'll be straight back up. You're having trouble breathing. Your heart's racing. You're feeling sick. This could be the preparation of the big one's going to come and get you. And you, oh, no, it's not on you. Label it and you let it go. And by this stage, you're really buying into the fear. And up it comes straight back up again. Your heart's racing, you're having trouble breathing, you're feeling really sick, now you're really, really dizzy, you've got to get some help. And you say, yes, of course I do. And you rush for the phone and you call the ambulance or you rush down to accident emergency. And that's what's going to happen a lot of the time when you're learning to let go. Because it still has the power over you. And so you just come back to square one again, you label the thought and let it go. And if you think you're tired now, you're going to be very tired doing this. It's very mentally exhausting. But there's a reason why we're doing this. Every time you let that thought go, you label that thought and let it go, you're stopping that thought from moving down the normal pathway in the brain. Cognitive therapy changes the thought pathways in the brain. Now, my psychiatrist said to me when we were talking about this process, he used the analogy of, you know, a paddock with long, tall grass in it, and there's a pathway going through the paddock field from point A to point B, and people have been using that as a shortcut for years and years and years. And so it's just, the bare earth path through this long grass. And that's what happens. Our thoughts have carved out this pathway, this shortcut in the brain. So every time we label the thought and let it go, we stop that thought impulse going down its regular pathway. Because it's got nowhere else to go, it begins to carve out another pathway. It's the same with, people going through the field, going through the paddock. They decide they don't want to go from point A to point B anymore, they want to go from point C to point D. So they start walking from point C to point D, they trample the grass down, the grass dies off, and over time there's a new path. And because they're not using pathway A to B, the grass grows back up again. And this is what we're doing with our thinking. Every time we stop the thought, let it go, we're stopping that thought from going down its normal pathway. And so it will start to create a new pathway. And this is why it's so exhausting if you're really practicing this. You are actually manually rerouting the thoughts in your head. It's like you becoming your own traffic police. And it's up to you, either you stop the thought traffic, or you let it go, or you let the thought just keep going down its normal route. It's up to you to redirect the thoughts. So you label it and let it go. You label it and you let it go. And you will get sucked in, you will get hooked into it. But the more aware you become, the less you fear it. Because you can see how it's being created. So you're becoming aware, you see your thinking, you see how it's turning on the fight and flight response. You see you have a choice, keep thinking the thoughts, you know where you're going to end up. Or you label it, you let it go. You become the thought police. That's the second part. Is anyone got any questions?
I was just thinking about thinking. What about in the middle of the night when you wake up and you've got that?
Words in our head. I mean, Claire Weeks talks about that we're being bluffed by fear, and she's exactly right. We are being bluffed by fear, and the fear is being created by these words in our head. And when you become aware and you see how it's all being created, you see through the bluff, you see through the illusion. You need to change your perception of your attacks. You need to change your perception of your thinking. It's a change of perception. Instead of seeing them as life-threatening, a threat to your insanity, that you're going to lose control, or obsessional thinking, or whatever, you've got to see them simply for what they are. It's just panic attacks, anxiety, or obsessional thoughts. And don't buy into it. Let it go. And your change of perception is your emotional development, moving along. It's like the way we buy into our anxiety and our panic and our thoughts, the whole bit. As kids, we used to be told horror stories and used to really love them and getting really scared and all that sort of stuff. Now we're adults and we're telling ourselves we're telling the horror story to ourselves. But there's no basis in fact. And we have to learn to perceive it as it really is. And we do that by being aware, seeing how it's all happening, and then choosing how we're going to work with this. We can either just keep on thinking these thoughts, or we can step in, stop, label it, let it go. The research shows that with cognitive therapy it takes you 3 months to change the pathway, the thought impulse pathway in the brain. I was a slow learner, it took me 4.5 months. So I say that so you know it's quite normal for it to go on a while. But I needed to work with it every day. Every waking moment I was there in my head. I had no idea of what I was doing at that point. No idea. All I knew was that I was starting to feel better. And so if it meant me just being in my head the whole time and working it, if that's what it's going to take for me to recover, that's what it's going to take. And I did recover. So that's the first part, first and second part, being aware of your thinking, seeing you have a choice, letting it go. Third part, what do you do with your anxiety and your panic when it's happening? What do we do at the moment? We fight it. I can't feel like this. We tense up. We're just trying to be in control the whole time. Recovery is going to demand that you let it happen. You stop fighting it. You give into it. Whatever it wants to do, you let it do it. If that means that your heart is racing and you know that's your anxiety, you let your heart race. If you're having trouble breathing and you haven't got asthma, then you allow yourself to have trouble breathing. If you're feeling sick, you allow yourself to feel sick. If you're shaking and trembling, you allow yourself to shake and tremble. If you want to throw up, then you throw up. If you have an attack of diarrhoea, you have an attack of diarrhoea.